You have come to the OMB updates to CFR Part 200. So what's changed and how to prepare. And again, my name is Kay Emerson, and I'm with SheRen Consulting. So to tell you a little bit about myself, so I'm a national trainer and consultant. I have over 20 years of experience really helping out with public administration, federal grants. And it's interesting as I was going and looking at the history of the changes that we have seen in this when it comes to CFR. I realized that my day, I started in the field before uniform guidance was uniform guidance. And I know we have some of you here that's also a thing. So we've been hanging out with CFR for several decades. So, but yeah, I do national training and volunteerism, national service, civic leadership, hello, Civic Month. And organizational capacity. I do a lot of things when it comes to providing strategic plannings, compliance support, and fiscal guidance. And I really help organization really kind of translate these complex systems and regulations into something that makes sense, something that can help work. And the whole purpose of this conversation today is to be able to do that for you, right? Now we know that we've been hearing about these changes with CFR for quite some time. And then I was alerted to it. I think it was maybe the end of May. So May 29th is when the new guidance or proposed guidance came out. And I found out about it 3 days later. And I was like, oh my goodness. I was just waiting and waiting for someone else to kind of come up with a webinar. And I was like, I guess I'm it. And being able to support the field. And I wanted to do something that was a little bit more widespread that can support individuals who are not just in the national service world, but also in a variety of grant grant administrations from education to science. To nonprofit work. My work in the field really kind of touches a lot of these sectors. And so I thought, what better way but to offer a webinar and where we could all just kind of come together if we should and have this conversation about, hey, what are these updates? I keep reading a lot of articles, but what does this mean for me? And being able to talk with you about what are some of those potential impacts that you can anticipate if you receive a federal funding in whatever capacity that is, as a prime, as a pass-through entity, as a subgrantee, as a subrecipient. We're all affected, and every branch is affected. And I really wanted to not just say, hey, here are the updates, but I wanted to take, how would I put it, capture this time, because there's still time for us to provide our field feedback to the government in meaningful public comments. So I wanted to actually talk about how do you actually submit a public comment and what makes a good one, right? So I think all things that could really help us move forward. So what is 2 CFR Part 200? Well, we know that it's the Code of Federal Regulations, but it's actually captures quite a few things. We have the uniform administrative requirements, the cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards. And so this is the rule book, and again, been studying this rule book for many years, but it tells us how our awards should be awarded, how they should be managed, budgeted, documented, monitored, and audited. Quite a bit, right? I think so too. Now, a little bit of the history. Again, this is not a history course, but I thought it's helpful to kind of give us the landscape. Where have we been? Where are we going? So in the 1950s through the 1970s, we had these separate rules. So the federal grant rules were spread across different entities. And so depending on who you're receiving money from, you could be following completely different rules. And so in 2013, the government OMB said, you know what? let's make this a little bit easier for everybody. And so that's how we had the circulars really kind of being braided into that 2 CFR Part 200, again, which is known as the Uniform Guidance. And then in 2014, that's when agencies were required to start implementing that. You see a little bit of this timeline. 2013 comes out to the 2014, we're implementing. So we see agencies start to adopt the Uniform Guidance moving forward. But then in 2020, so hello pandemic world, we come out with some revised information. And it was really addressing what is our performance? How do we reduce our burden? How do we become more clear, plain language, and really kind of support some of the inconsistent interpretation, which if you have a federal award for the Department of Education, but then you have a federal award with CDC, trust me, completely different sometimes. But in 2025, we are all very familiar with the race, DEI, and the grant oversight context that through executive orders, it really focused on reducing the race, reviewing our contracts and grants. And I know some of us had a great time spending time going through all of our grants that we submitted and looking through and say, hey, is there any language in here that we shouldn't have? And it's also something that we're still seeing very much still to this day with our notice of awards, or even just being able to submit up our request and implement and receiving our awards. But so 2025 was really, we got a lot of these executive orders. So now in 2026, now that we have these executive orders, we're finding the government wanting to actually make things a lot stronger and moving away from guidance to regulations. So yeah, you may think you could do it this way, but actually that's law and you violated that. So we're gonna, revoke your grant. So very large implications. So we'll talk about that. Okay. Now, before we do, one of the things I really appreciated about what the OMB did, they did this regulatory impact analysis. And so it took grants from 2015 through 2024, both federal grants and cooperative agreements. And they looked over 100,000 unique recipients who were receiving federal grant funding. And I found it kind of interesting. And so I thought I wanted to share here that when it came to who's receiving the most, well, we see that nonprofits are receiving the most types of grants for when it comes to federal awards. Then we see that our for-profit entities, which is almost like really for-profit. I found that as a very interesting fact that for-profits are not too far behind on our nonprofits on receiving federal funding. And so they're at that 31.8%. And then we have our states and our local or territory governments after that. And then our institution of higher education is only 2.3. Very interesting, very interesting. But going back here, what they found was that they said the benefits are mostly qualitative, right? So they expect that through the new regulations that we're going to improve our transparency, we're going to improve our accountability, our oversight, and our payment integrity. In addition, they're also saying that yeah, we're doing these things, but we're not 100% sure what that means about the cost. Our costs are not fully quantified. So they actually don't know how much cost is going to affect the community. They also did say that depending on the type of recipient, this could be like a small costly change for you, or it could be very substantial. So they didn't say this is going to be not a very high cost of change. And they didn't say that it was going to be a very expensive change for some agency. They said, well, it depends on who you are, right? And the big thing is that they identify that capacity is a key risk. So they stated that the risk related to the staff time, our financial systems, our audit preparation, and our sub-recipient monitoring are going to be mostly affected. But why should we care? Like, why should we care? Well, one of the reasons why we should care is because, again, they have not assessed the benefits are not fully measured. We have this change that's happening, but we don't know exactly how will it really benefit our goal. Also, we don't know how much this is actually going to cost our organization on a day-to-day basis. And again, with our smaller and more low capacity organization, we might actually experience a high level of burden. And then lastly, we should care because this is going to impact our staff time. What is our staff doing? What systems that we've spent a long time putting in place? It also is going to impact our audit readiness. Some of us have went through federal audits. It's been great. And we've made those adjustments. But guess what? The standards are changing. And so we have to relook at how prepared are we for these new regulations. So what's the reason? Why are we doing it in the first place? Because again, they say that we're trying to improve. We're trying to improve our transparency, our accountability across all departments when it comes to standards and consequences. They really want to safeguard against race, fraud, and abuse and consistency. So all things that we're very familiar with, especially if you've been around in the grant field for a while. We know that this is what OMB is about. And so them stating that, hey, this is the reason why we're doing it. Okay. But what it doesn't mean, this does not mean that every federal agency, recipient or subrecipient, is going to prepare the exact same way. Okay. And federal agencies may issue conforming regulation, adopting the regulations, or implementation policies. So what this means is that, yes, there are changes that are going to be coming at the federal level, but depending on who your prime agency, your federal agency that is awarding your grant, they will be able to adopt how they conform to these new rules. So we'll still need to have to pay attention to what our federal agencies are telling us and following or guidance. But again, the key changes. So now that we talked a little bit about the history, we're kind of hopping to some of the key changes. So key changes, again, guidance to regulations. Right now, it's called uniform guidance, but now it's going to be more uniform regulations. And so the proposed change will turn that into a regulatory status. Other key changes is award selections and risk review. So currently, agencies already review applicants' risk before making awards. The proposed change is when it comes to risk reviews, we're going to have to consider other things. So this might be financial capacity, affiliations, and I feel like the affiliation part is quite big because this makes us go, okay, there's going to be more questions about who our partners are. And do our partners have questionable practices that need to be considered, right? The agency is also proposing to change how discretionary awards align with the agency's priorities, the presidential policy priorities, and any national interest. So when you think about the impact you have to consider is applications may need to show your policy alignment, not only your program fit. And so I think that's one of the things when we're thinking about our grant writing that we have to take in consideration. A lot of times we're writing about, this is our program fit. This is how we're going to meet community need. This is our capacity and why we can maintain this. However, we may, with some of these impacts, consider, okay, now I need to talk a little bit more about how my policy aligns, that my affiliates don't have questionable practices, that my compliance history has been good, right? So there's going to be a lot more weighting with that potentially if these go into effect. Next is our indirect costs may affect competitiveness. I really think about our state entities, specifically our colleges, our institutions of higher educations, who are typically able to negotiate these higher indirect costs. And so currently organizations may use a negotiated or de minimis indirect rate cost to recover any of those administrative overhead costs. So when you're thinking about your administrative costs, these are costs one can think about like your accounting staff, or it could be how much you're paying for rent. It's not part of the actual budget itself, but you are able to charge an indirect on these federal awards to help cover some of those costs. So now the proposed change does not change that you can negotiate your indirect rate, but what it will do, it adds an additional factor that if you have a higher indirect rate, we may choose the organization with the lower indirect rate. So something can consider organizations with higher negotiated rates. You may face more, you may have a competitive disadvantage when it comes to federal awards moving forward, even when those rates reflect the true cost of doing. So not a good change, but again, just sharing the data for you all to consider. The other thing to consider when it comes to key changes is payment requests and verification. And if you currently are managing the finance aspects of your grants, and you're responsible for going into the payment management system and submitting your drawdown, you're probably very familiar with the level of detail that is currently being asked, because currently, recipients may request advance or reimbursement payments with limited explanation in federal payment systems. But what we've been seeing, and now it's going to become a proposed change, if not refined, that payment requests will need more explanation. Recently, we were submitting up our budget for some supplemental funds that we were getting for our department. And before, we were just able to submit up the main budget document, the SF. It has some numbers behind it. However, and it would list out specifically, like, agency A receives this much, agency B receives this much, agency C receives this much, right? However, they ask for the actual budgets of agency A and agency B and agency C. So not just we can put it on the document to go up and be reviewed, but we have to provide additional supportive documentation explaining what does that amount make up, which we had the documentation definitely for sure, because we were working through procurement. However, it required more time both on the staff and as it relates to documentation to submit up to the agency just to be able to receive our award. And so this will also continue to impact our drawdowns. And when one of the things that it really kind of impacts as an organization, especially with our nonprofit organizations who are receiving those federal funds, we have to think about our cash flow. And it's something that, when you're having federal awards and thinking about your reimbursement rate, reimbursements after you spent and submitted into your agency, you typically have to have a little bit of cash flow to get you to that next month, because you have like a 45, 60-day turnaround on those payments. However, this impact may make that timeline even longer. So cash flow, you have to think about that. Another key change is conditions added during an award. This is an interesting proposal. So right now, agencies can place specific conditions on awards when risk or compliance concerns exist. Typically, you're going through subrecipient monitoring or just monitoring, and then you might go down a little bit further and have corrective action plan. And so there has to be justifications to add additional conditions onto organizations during a grant period. Well, the proposed change is that agencies could add or adjust specific conditions at any time during the award period, including reimbursement requirements, extra reporting, site visits, technical assistance, or even prior approvals. Again, what we have to think about is, how would this impact us as an organization if you are receiving an award under one set of expectations, and then 2 months later, you're faced with more burdensome requirements? What is that going to do for your organization? And are you ready? All right. Now, this one has definitely spurred up a lot of, how would I say this? Feedback in the organizations, and just even with the public comments that are currently on there, termination and suspension. So currently, awards may already be terminated for noncompliance and mutual agreements of awards. However, what the added feature of it is, awards can be suspended or terminated based on agencies' interests, their changes of program goals, their priorities, or even their national interests. So we saw a little bit of that in 2025, and where our 2024-2025 grants were suddenly suspended or terminated. And then it was thankful that we were able to see some of those awards come back within this period, and there's a lot of litigation around that. What this proposed change does is it puts it in law that, yes, it can happen at any point in time. So the impact that you have to consider as an organization, as someone in the field, or who's either doing the work or providing support to individuals who are doing the work in the field, is that, what's the contingency plan for our staff, for our agencies, for our community? Have we even had that conversation? What will be the impact to consider? And again, these are proposed. None of these have gone into effect as of yet. 10/1/2026 is the date that these will go into effect. But again, they're in this a comment period, and we'll talk about that here pretty soon. Now, this one's interesting too. Fixed award limit usage. One of the things, as someone that has supported agencies work through different grant awards, is being able to really kind of talk about the benefit of a fixed award. Now, a fixed award really kind of reduces the financial reporting when milestones are met, and we recently seen some additional guidance around that as well, which has been absolutely amazing and helpful, because it allows those organizations to still get the work done and the deliverables met, but being able to have less administrative burden, especially when you have a team that could be relatively small. So, but the proposed change says that fixed amount subawards are no longer allowed unless the pass-through entities, unless it's like written in law. So pass-through entities would face a stronger reporting classification and monitoring expectations. So yeah. So fixed awards, subawards no longer be allowed with these proposed changes. And I really feel like this is one of those things that will change, if going into effect, will change the landscape of grant administration, because fixed awards have been a huge benefit to organizations across the nation. And so, yeah, something to think about. If you're a fixed award, if you have a fixed award, what does that mean? Are you ready for the additional documentation, which, one would argue we should be doing a little bit anyways, but it's just something to consider. So, yeah. Now, the national policy requirements may need review. This is 2 CFR 200, 2.300A through C. Now, currently the federal awards, we must adhere to the Constitution, right? The federal laws and the national policy requirements. Well, we have some new proposed language really around the use of supporting disparate impact theories is what we're calling it. And in addition to incorporating viewpoints and content related to discrimination. And what they mean by this are DEI, DEIA, gender ideology, how are we supporting our faith-based organizations, and how are we remaining neutral? How are we remaining neutral with our awards and the funds? So we got a little bit of taste of this in 2025. Now this is going to take those executive orders and put them into law. So again, something to consider is reviewing your programs, reviewing your communications, reviewing your procurement, your budgets, and your cost allocations. I could tell you that one of the things that recently happened on the public health field is with the removal of support for syringe access support. There's some specifics around that, but one of the things that we had to do with our budgets is we had to remove any language specific to supporting the community with clean syringes. We could pay for medication to help with overdosing, but we can't help support with syringe access, clean syringes. So for individuals who are utilizing substances. So interesting things we have to consider. And even to this day, having to stop and look over our language, it feels like an ongoing, everyday type of thing. So, okay. So you thought we're done. Guess what? There's more. That's why you decided to be here today, to talk about it, to learn about it. We also have procurement and allowable costs. So there's a whole set of standards that we have to follow when it comes to our procurement methods and allowabilities. We call this cost principles, right? Well, the proposed changes is going to modify some of these procurements and our cost provision, really kind of, and I find this interesting, discouraging cost reimbursement contracts, which need notice and justification. I'm curious to see how this particular proposed change will in fact play out, or if it will actually make it to the final, because I think out of all the different changes, this one's a little bit confusing. It's like, okay, if we can't use fixed awards and we can't use cost reimbursements, what are we using? So some things to consider and to think about is that we may need to review our procurement policies, our contract selections, and possibly reclassifying how we are looking at our costs right now, and most specifically our non-federal funds, because there's going to be a lot more oversight on how those non-federal funds are being used. And so I think about let's take an after school program. And so and they receive quite a bit of different funds, federal, community, foundation, to support the after school program. And so part of the program or the federal funds is used for the education, helping students achieve education outcomes. And another part of the award or the program, like the foundation funds, are more specific to helping students explore their identity. Well, what some of these allowable costs are saying on the non-federal funds, well, as part of your program, this overall after-school program that you told us that we're supporting, well, these non-federal funds are being used to help support students and their ideology, their identification parts. And so we have to be a little bit more careful as we're building out our program designs and being able to go, okay, which part are we actually saying this program is for, versus is there anything in this program design that we're submitting up for our federal award and where any part of the program, even on the non-federal side, would not be supported. So, and we do a little bit of that already when it comes to things like lobbying and how you can't use funds for that. But there's going to be a lot more review on the agency when it comes to the rules around it. All right, moving on. So now that we got through some of the changes, you're like, that's all of it? I was like, well, it's some of it. It's some of it. You definitely gonna advise you to look through it yourself as well, because that is how you're gonna prepare to make this manageable. Again, we're looking at right now, we are in this process of comments. Like we can make comments about this, right, until July 13th, which is in a couple of weeks from now. And then from there, we have until 10/1 before the final rules come out. But what we should start to do, what we can do now, which could be really helpful as we're thinking about this next program year or getting ready for the next program year, is start with the federal funding you already manage. Okay, so you want to review your award portfolio. We're going to be thinking about things like your federal awards, if your sub awards, if you're prime, maybe subcontracts, cooperative agreements, or if you're receiving money as a pass-through entity. So another thing that you want to think about is what kind of oversight, and this is more of a comment for our organizations that are on the line today, that you're more the prime recipients and you may have a sub-recipient agreements. You might continue to look over your sub-recipient oversight and kind of work with your team on saying, does our monitoring practice currently uplift lead to these? Or if you don't have very strong reporting systems, this might be something that we need to think about. And of course, returning of unspent funds. How are you doing with that? Is that something, if you no longer have a fixed award, is something that you're going to have to do? I will stress this pretty hardcore. When it comes to your cash flow, says workflows and cash flows, your payment cash flows. Really think about when it comes down to how far can we get. If it took 2 months, if it took 3 months to get reimbursed, could we maintain that? Or is our drop date 30 days? Being able just to have that information and to know will help you be able to be more prepared for those delays in payments. And then also, will you need additional approval steps? Or when it comes to your documentation, is it strong enough? Are you explaining what you spent the funds on? The other thing that you're, as I said before, is to reviewing your program and your policy alignment. And I think this is really going to come into a lot of play as we're writing our proposals for the next grant cycle, is thinking about your program design, your eligibility criteria. How are you communicating out the world? And are you following these new requirements? So just take a look at it and think about it. The other thing I could share with you is strengthening your internal systems now, right? Plan for disruption. So if in this next program year, your grant is suspended or terminated, what's the plan? What's the contingency plan? Even just having a couple notes is helpful. Or thinking about how you dealt with it in 2025 and where do you want to make improvements in this upcoming year if you needed to. You also want to look at things like your templates and your agreements. On the AmeriCorps side, I definitely think about the AmeriCorps volunteer agreement. I'm still trying to work on that language, Miracle member, Miracle volunteer, agreements. Are there any languages in there that needs to be revised? I think about your budget narratives. As that example that I was just sharing with my own department, how we had to look at, go through each of our subgrantees, vendors' budgets and take out language like syringe access in order to meet the new requirements. Something that what we do on a bigger side of things, we look at our cost allocation plans, and we're also kind of getting together our compliance, any like compliance audits that we received, or findings, or how we resolve those findings, things like that. In the last 3 years, we've been just creating like a central folder that we all know where it's at, which has been really helpful. And then it's also kind of, I think, very helpful to really think about your staff time. Who's going to be doing what, right? Is your legal team ready? Or do you have a legal team, or can you partner with an agency? Assessing that administrative capacity, because this is one of the things that will impact depending on the size of your organization, but especially those smaller organizations who are receiving federal awards. But yeah, there's a couple of things there. Moving forward. Yeah. All right. But again, this is just one session out of all the materials out there. One of the things, in addition to the recording and the slides, you're going to receive a list of some additional reading with links, which is, I think, is going to be really helpful depending on where you sit when it comes to all this. So, for example, if you're in the nonprofit world, being able to follow the National Council of Nonprofits, they recently released the sector analysis that really talks about, these changes by section. So again, you're participating in this live webinar, but being able to read it for yourself and say, okay, I think I see how this affects us, is going to be really, really helpful. But they are going to be looking at that a nonprofit lens. I really liked Ropes and Gray's legal and compliance summary chart that they provided. And so one of the things that they do is they go section by section, really kind of proposing and highlighting what are going to be those implications for award recipients. They even talk about our research institutions and our federal funded organizations. And then because our higher education, you play a very unique role in this huge picture. And so being able, for the Association of American University, they put out on their higher education resource hub just a collection. So not just one, but a collection of resources and analysis and stakeholder perspectives to the proposed uniform guidance. So this webinar, you being here with me today, is one of the many, many resources out there to help you be educated about what is going on and what you can do in your capacity, as well as where you sit. That's going to be really helpful. So yeah. So, but the public comments, again, I could have ended our webinar there and gave you back some beautiful time in your life. However, that would be a disservice, giving you the resources and then not telling you what you can do now, because one of the things that is so great about our field is that we have experience, we have knowledge, we are experts. And our public comments is where our experience becomes evidence. Okay? So, you're still hanging in there with me. I would like to re-engage you a little bit here. And I want you to answer this question. Let's see in the chat, truth or myth. If 10,000 plus people submit a comment about the same thing, does the OMB have to implement that feedback? Let me hear it. Truth or myth? Let's see what we got in the chat. Let's see what we got. See. Wow, we got Arizona in here. Yay, Manhattan, Kansas, Oregon. Whoa, Baltimore. Oh, look at that. We got someone from Kentucky. Hey, sis. So I just take me a while of it. Okay, myth. Okay, well, I feel like we have grant professionals in the field because da-da. Oop, went too far. Myth, you're right. You're right. You're so right. I'm so glad. Good job, everyone. Kudos. Because public comments are not a vote. Sorry, we don't get to vote in this process. The OMB just must consider our relevant comments. They're not required to adopt our feedback based on the number of comments submitted. What honestly matters is whether our comment is clear, if we are specific, if we're relevant, and if we're helping explain the real world impact. They state the agency shall give interested person an opportunity to participate in the rulemaking. Isn't it great to get a participation badge? No, okay. But so why do we do it? Why do we do it? Well, the OMB, they use our public comments to be able to understand what aspects of the proposals is going to be effective. They want to know what are the potential challenges. They also want to know what's going to be the impact of this change on our programs, on our budgets, and our communities. Our comments also gives them feedback on where they might need to clarify, where they might need to consider timeline for adoption, or maybe they should scrap it and try all over again with alternative approaches. Who knows, right? However, our feedback really helps with them being able to consider these things. And for us, one of the truth is, our public comments are one way organizations and individuals help shape what federal requirements are finalized. It's like, it's not a vote, but it's definitely getting your voice out there. And two, public comments go beyond agreement or disagreement. They really help explain how the proposed requirements might actually function in practice. And I have to put truth number 3 in there. Inaction is action. So not commenting, not doing a public comment, well, you made an action on this. Making a comment, you did do an action. So do it or not do it. It's still an action. Also, very, very important are different perspectives. They matter. Individuals, we share personal and professional experiences. I can't even tell you how much I think about being able to hang out with e-grants and on the phone trying to get something to work on the system. That's experience. Sad experience, but that's experience, right? And some of you know what that feels like. I'm still doing it to this day. Organizations discuss operations, operational budget, staffing and compliance effects, coalitions. So if you're part of a coalition, you can help highlight the patterns that you're seeing across various organizations or communities. As governmental entities, well, we help identify what the conflicts are on the regional aspect. And as practitioners, well, we have lots of data, analysis, and we have alternative solutions. But if you're in this room, I know you're a practitioner and an expert. So what information is helpful? Okay, what information is helpful? Impacts on specific groups or activities, accuracy of the agency assumptions, and they made a lot, unintended consequences. I can see that train coming a mile away, and I know it's going to hit, and it's going to hit hard. Speaking of hard, the hard to measure costs or benefits, because some of the proposed changes could be a really good benefit. Some are huge cost. It also really helps us know what is our concerns about implementing this, right? If I have 3 vendors who currently are fixed awards, and I have to switch them, I need time to do that. Can we implement that on the next grant cycle? They need that feedback. Examples that they've missed, and they missed some for sure. But it's really important for you to know public comments will become public record. Okay? You have the option to submit anonymously, but I will guide you. Do not include confidential business information, private personal information, or anything you don't want publicly posted. I used to have a boss that used to say, and back in Kansas, he'd say, "Would you like that to be on the Topeka Public Journal?" And I would go, "Nope." So we didn't put it in there, right? So, think about that, put that in your own context, right? Now, how to submit an effective public comment. Again, lots of different ways, but to do this in a more of a formula approach, you're going to have an introduction. You're going to include the specific citation. They say include the citation. If you don't include the citation, we can't help you. But if you include the specific citation, this will help them quickly identify. You're going to explain why you're interested in the regulation and highlight any experience with the subject of the rule. Remember, subject of the rule. You're going to include some background. You're going to clearly identify the relevant parts of the regulations you are commenting on. You're going to give a little bit of analysis. You don't have to go crazy with analysis. I know we got some fun analysis people on the line, but you don't go crazy on it. But if you want to, I've seen some pretty long comments. You can lay out your argument and evidence, including how the action may impact you, your organization, and the communities that you serve. You are leading the voice. You also want to include, as much as you can, any recommendations that you have. Describe your suggestions and then identify specific changes, clarifications, timelines, or alternatives. Conclusion, of course, you can't write anything without a conclusion, right? Intro and conclusions. Recap your main argument and restate your recommendation. Nice little formula for you. And here, I'm going to just leave this on the slide for a second. This is, again, that writing frame. Yeah. I'm commenting my experience with this, the proposed change. One concern is, so again, use your own language, but these at least will help you get further down the path. So make a plan. Make a plan. We love plans. Before writing, because it is June 25th, comments are due June 13th at 11:59 Eastern time. That's 9 o'clock my time, 10 o'clock Central time. So make a plan. Identify your most significant issues. Which sections or issues are most important? You have this wonderful a slide deck, and where you can, and they have the citations on there. If it piqued your interest, like I want to talk about that, find it, read it, write it up, give your perspective. What is your perspective? Are you responding as an individual, as a group? Think about who can assist, collaborate. I'm part of the Grant Professional Association on the national level, and then I also sit on the Colorado board here. And we developed a statement. The Grant Professional Association did. They sent it out to all the members. We reviewed, and if we wanted to sign our name on it, we could sign our name on it, and they submitted it on our behalf, right? For you, it might be, who's your partners that you want to bring along? You also want to think about your core message. What's the issue? What's the impact? And what are you recommending, right? And set that personal deadline. I could tell you sometimes my personal deadline is like by 8 p.m. on July 13th. That's my personal deadline, right? But at least I gave myself that personal deadline. Did I say 8 p.m.? I meant 7, because if I waited till 8, I would be too late. So what would that time be for you? So make that personal deadline and allow time for review before submitting your comments. Lastly here, you just must submit online electronically on or before Monday, July 13th, 2026. Said that several times. Again, electronically. I will send out additional correspondence for you all to look and consider at. And then my final takeaways before we open it up for any questions or thoughts or just some general discussion is 2 CFR Part 200 is the current uniform guidance framework. Okay? They're moving this guidance to regulation, to law. These changes, if they go into effect, will shift how we select, how we get paid, how we monitor, how we modify, and how things may be terminated. Depending on where you sit, I've said this several times, your organization may be impacted differently. So talk to your friends, talk to the other people. Hey, did you read about the changes? How's that going to affect you? Having those coffee chats are really, really great ways to connect, as well as being able to share how things change for you all. Preparation starts with reviewing your systems before the final rule is issued, because right now we're in the comment period. The comment period will close. The final ruling will be issued, and then it will be implementation, right? And so when that final review, when that final rule is issued, you got to go back and look to say, okay, what did they say? And who knows? I'll probably do this again, another webinar on the final rule. This is a fun thing to prepare and help me get ready for this as well. And most importantly, your experience is valid. And participating in public comment, it matters, because if you don't, who will? And if you don't, you just made a decision that maybe you're okay with all this stuff. So with that, thank you. My name is Kay Emerson. I'm at SheRen Consulting. And you can email me at info@sheren.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook, SheRenaissance Co. And then I also have a website. So yeah. If you have to leave, goodbye. But if you'd like to stay and have a conversation, let's have a conversation.